Hello, hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into the Odd Thoughts Podcast. At the Odd Thoughts Podcast, we like to talk about the everyday odd thoughts, have conversations on relatable topics, and discuss whatever comes to mind. My name is Gunther, and I am your host. Welcome to episode 47. For episode 47, I wanted to start off by talking about people watching. I'm not necessarily always out in public around people. I get very overstimulated and overwhelmed, but one thing I like to do to help me relax and just feed my mind a little bit is just watch people living their lives. Then I wanted to transition into talking a little bit about grief. There is a process that we go through, a grieving process that we go through when we lose someone that we love or when we lose something significant. There is a confusing time that we go through, and there's a lot of pain that's associated with it. And grieving is important and inevitable, and it's something that we all do. Then I wanted to transition into talking a little bit about sympathy, kind of staying on that realm of compassion. Sympathy is when it's showing emotion when someone else is showing emotion. It's feeling alongside someone else's feelings. It's very much so a way to help someone see that they're being seen with their emotions and they're being heard. Then I wanted to end it on talking about an article that I had read. I had read an article that was talking about China's push for this child having incentive that they're trying to push more women to have kids nowadays because of an underpopulation problem. And I thought it was interesting to kind of share on, and I want to try to share more of my thoughts on real world things. So that's my I'm taking a step into that. But yeah, if you want to listen to any of these topics, can I hope you continue tuning in. Stay tuned in, please. Don't go nowhere. I hope y'all enjoy. Before we step into the episode, how's everybody doing? I really hope y'all are doing okay. I'm happy to see you guys stopping by listening. I'm happy to see you guys woke up today and took a breath in. I really, really am. I'm I'm doing all right. I won't play with you guys. I'm not doing super great. I'm doing okay today. I was a little bit better yesterday, but I didn't record a podcast earlier this week. I didn't do one on Tuesday, which I do Tuesdays and Fridays. I was going through a little bit of something. I suffer very heavily with depression, and I have severe depression, and it's one of them things where like you never know when it's going to happen, and you just have it starts with one rough moment that leads into a rough day that leads into a few more rough days, and I was going through it over the weekend, and it was from Friday to Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday ish. Like I said, the last couple of days I've stepped out of it and I've felt a little bit better, but that dark cloud is hard to shake, man. It really is, and so much feeds into that depression. And one of my big things is when I get depressed is like I get very delusional at times, and that's such a big thing to say, and I feel a little like shameful of myself when I say that, but I start to get that dread thinking. That's more so what it is. I start to think that, I'm no good and, nothing's going to turn out for me and everything I do is just hopeless and, people don't love me and da 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 da. And it's just delusional thinking. It's paranoia. And, I've been diagnosed with paranoia. It's something I very much so live with. And depression only exaggerates that stuff. And I describe depression as very much so as a lack of all feeling. And it could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be a little bit of everything, but sometimes it just feels like I'm not feeling anything. I'm just sitting there and I'm wallowing. I'm like sinking. It's like a sinking feeling. And it's hard to pull myself out of it. Like, I want to like, watch YouTube videos or I want to write, I want to do art, but when I'm in that overhangingness of that depression, it becomes like impossible for me to get out of it. It becomes like an impossible task to think about doing anything to make me feel better or doing anything I love or doing anything to continue my like creation or being a creative person. So it blocked me from wanting to do anything and having an episode. But eventually, I know that like the only way I can step out of those bits is like, I have a hard time sharing my emotions, but I do feel better when I share my emotions. But I don't ever want to be someone that sits there and trauma dumps, and I don't want to be like, I don't want to overshare, and that's something that I really like hold on to. But I am surrounded by people that I know listen to me, and my dad's like the biggest person that like he's the guy that I go to when I feel a certain way. But sometimes I just like I am getting better about like I know that it's me that's feeling these emotions, and that's the whole thing. That's a struggle with paranoia is that I just feel like sometimes it's other things happening, and like it's like other people doing it to me, which is so stupid. Or like I said, man, it gets so dumb. But I really do know that it's me feeling these emotions, and I'm the only one that's going to be able to break out of it, and I'm the only one that's going to be able to move past what I'm feeling. But it's hard, and like I said, I don't. When I'm in most days, I really don't want to be seen or heard. So like when I'm depressed, it's like which I'm depressed all the time. But when I go through really bad stouts and really bad like stints, it hurts more, and I further don't even want to like see myself, and like I don't want to do anything for myself, and it's such a dark place to be, and I struggle very heavily with it, and I don't know, I don't want to be too depressing. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't want to be too depressing. I just think it's something that a lot of people deal with, and nowadays it's like I don't know. It's sometimes it feels like depression gets thrown around, and like everybody will claim they have depression, and just because they're a little sad or they're a little down, but it's a hell that I think like it's hard to get out of, and it spikes my anxiety because like I feel so guilty and shamed and so stupid and all these things, man. But yeah, I'm recording an episode today. I'll get back up on it. I'm going to record up to I'm gonna do up to 50, and then I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm just going to try to think about maybe reformatting the podcast a little bit. I want to start talking about some more real world stuff, like talking about real world topics and giving my personal thoughts on that kind of stuff, as well as try to maybe throw in a couple guests. I think my first guest will be my little sister. Maybe she talked about it a few episodes ago, like wanting to do it. So, I think that'd be kind of fun. And so I'm gonna maybe try to surround myself with that kind of stuff, and try to like format things a little differently. So this is episode 47. I'll have 48, 49, 50, and then I'll take a short break. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into episode 47. When I'm out in public, like just around a bunch of people, one of my favorite things to do is people watch. I feel a little weird sometimes. It's kind of like, but it's not like I'm being weird about it. It's just I like kind of living vicariously through people's lives, kind of, and there's something exciting kind of to think about every single person that kind of passes by you and what their everyday lives are like and who they are. And I'm not a very confident person, and I'm not necessarily like great with small talk, and I don't want to be friends with everybody, so I'm not going to go ask them. So I'm destined to just sit there and watch. I'm not sitting there and judging ever. It's just kind of one of those things where it feels like kind of like an unconscious thing that I just kind of do. I just like I'm a little nosy, maybe even. I just kind of like seeing what things are and seeing what people do and things, seeing what things are, seeing how things fold out, play out, or whatever. I maybe a little eavesdropping, maybe a little bit of that too. But generally, just I just feel like I don't have a lot of exciting things that go on in my life, maybe. And so anytime I'm out in public, I'm already pretty excited, I guess. And I get overwhelmed a little bit, and I get a little overstimulated and things like that. So when I'm around a bunch of people, it kind of helps me, calm myself down or relax when I kind of just sit back and I just watch. I just see what people do. And also maybe gives me kind of a vibe of like what the place is and, what people are doing and, what their kind of vibes are. It maybe also maybe scares me a little bit in the way of like if I feel like I don't fit in, then it makes me just even more, anxiety heightened or whatever. But I have a lot of fun doing it because you get so many different peoples of so many different walks of lives, and it could be like say, I go out to the mall or something like that. It could be someone like one person shopping for their spouse at home, or someone just trying to pass the time until their next thing they're doing, or it's a family and it's a kid who's crying and whining about something, or a kid who's enjoying on some ice cream or a new present they got from whatever shop. So I have a lot of fun, and I consider like I have certain emotions are contagious to me. Like I'm not gonna, I don't cry when other people cry. I don't get mad when other people get mad, but laughter, like when people smile and laugh and stuff like that, that makes me very happy. I can't help but like, you know, resemble the same thing or, just enact the same kind of emotion. And that's one of those things when I kind of like I'm people watching, you kind of see people just enjoying their day or just doing whatever and just like whatever, however simple it is, it makes me happy. You know, kind of makes me feel human in a way that, everybody's just doing their own thing and they're kind of just like, it's just amazing to think about on your day-to-day life and how many people, are going to pass by you and how many people you're going to pass and well, everybody's kind of different in their own little ways and that's something I love to think about. It's with how many billions of people that are here on this earth and potential of life forms on other earths. It's just crazy. I love thinking about that kind of stuff. It's a big thing, and I get like when I'm around a bunch of people, I get overwhelmed. I really do. I get overstimulated. I have a little bit of that claustrophobia, being enclosed with a bunch of people, and a little bit of that kind of self doubt and have an anxiety where like I don't feel like I'm gonna act right, even though I'm not like a weird, bad, negative person like that. I just feel like I'm not gonna do what everybody thinks like they want me to do. It's a weird expectation I put on myself for no reason. It's as people do. Maybe it's like growing up, like, your parents always kind of telling you to act right before you walk into somewhere. So, that's kind of what my parents were. It's like I don't want any whining or crying type thing. So maybe I still kind of hold on to a little bit of that, a little bit of that, like I gotta act right when I'm around other people. Even though, I've been around people that don't act right around others, like very obviously don't, and they don't mind doing that. At least I'm freaking out about it. Whatever. But I like people even like when I'm at home, like and I see people outside walking in the streets or whatever, I see a car, I can't help but to think. Like I just can't help but to like wonder what's gonna happen or what nothing bad, just like where they're going. Are they going home? And if they're leaving the neighborhood, where are they going? Are they going to work? Are they going to, run an errand? Are they going to do something fun? Meet up with someone they haven't seen in I like to think about that kind of stuff too. I like to picture in my head that, maybe someone's like driving to, go meet with someone they haven't met with in a long time or, go see their child at home. They just came into town or something like that. I don't know. I like thinking like that. It's fun. And it kind of is one of those things where when I as a writer or like trying to be a writer, like I consider myself a writer, I haven't really written anything, just a bunch of semi half-assed stories, part of my language. But it's one of those things where like I tried my best to like, wrap my head around more abstract ideas and try to formulate ideas out of like, the thin air type thing. But a lot of things like with art are based in realism in the certain ways of inspiration. So when I see certain people and I see like, even if I don't know them personally, you still kind of get a little like, you kind of start to get ideas for things in your head. And I like to, I don't surround myself around a lot of people in general, but the times I do, I really try to ingest what people are doing. It makes me, like I said, it makes me feel human. It's one of those things where it's, maybe like not always okay with the parts of myself. So, I just try to see how everybody else is okay with themselves or, and it's only so much you can tell from the outside of people. And maybe there's a little bit of this, interest, this of like, I would love to delve into people's lives, but also like, I don't know how I can handle it. It's weird to say. I'm an empathetic person for sure. Like, I understand people's plights and people's, things in their lives and whatever. As I do, like, understand that there's mine, and I know there are people that understand me. But I just like one of those things where maybe I put it on myself that I want to be like good representation anytime I meet someone, or like I want to that like every interaction has to be perfect in some way or whatever, and when you start to meet people that maybe have certain, issues in their life, as most of us do, and they share things with their lives, like that's a big responsibility, and I take that very seriously when people like share with me and stuff like that. I do very much so, but I just don't want to like let people down with that information. That's one thing too. Like I just don't like want to let people down. I don't know why. I just don't want to let anybody down. So that's my general like senses. Like going out in public, even if I don't know these people, you know what I'm saying? I'm only gonna be around them for a certain period of time, out of a certain chunk of the day, out of a certain chunk of my life. And I mean, like, it doesn't matter as long as I act okay. And and I don't do anything to hurt anybody or harm anybody in any way or derail their day or whatever. I always have that in my mind, and I know that that's how I, you know, intrinsically act. I try to be as polite as possible, and I try not to ask for too much or burden people too much when I'm out in public. When I'm outside my own home, it's one of them things. Like I just feel weird. But nonetheless, like I said, I get out in public every once in a while, and I think it's this thing that a lot of people do. It's just a little bit of that nosiness, and maybe sometimes you can pick up on conversations, definitely by like facial expressions. You might can tell like maybe they're having a good passionate conversation, like out of love or out of anger, or like I said, laughter. Like when I see people smiling out of public, I'm assuming they're having a good time. And I like that. I like to think that maybe those people are having the most perfect day, and I like to think that kind of stuff. Enjoy as much as I avoid people in my life, I enjoy people. It's not like I avoid it out of self-consciousness, like or like a certain self-perception I have of my own of myself. It's not because I hate people necessarily. I don't get along with everybody maybe, but I just know that like it's not because I hate them. It's just because I don't vibe with them, and I'm not gonna play. I've done enough of that playing like that. I can get along with certain people. I've done enough of that. I'm too old for that now. I'm 27, going on 28. I'm just like don't have to impress anybody anymore. But I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't have to like try to put my best foot forward, as I do, as I try to do all the time. I just like I said, people watching just makes me feel human. It's kind of one of those really simple things, and it doesn't matter if I'm around a lot of people or only a few people. It just always feels like I'm kind of doing that thing where, I'm just observing how people act and, people's lives and maybe trying to formulate it into my own mind without trying to put a bias on people where it's like I have a story in my head and that's what the true story is because people are just existing. And it's kind of amazing to think about how many billions of people are on this earth and how many you'll interact with and or in just the minimalness of like passing by them, you know what I'm saying? And I think everybody does a little bit of that, people watching. Like I said, doesn't matter if you're around a lot of people or a few people. I think everybody likes to observe people every once in a while. When we lose someone that we're close to, there is a pain that coincides with it. We will try our best to process a very confusing time. And no matter whether you've come to accept it beforehand, grief hits hard and it's not okay to hold on to painful feelings too long. There is no say in how long the process is or what's the best way to grieve. Everybody's grieving process is going to be different with all the same hopeful goals nonetheless, in the grieving, but maybe there are only specific ways you can do it. Like I said, it doesn't always look the same. Offering support to others in time of grief is very helpful too, and that can help them go through hard times just as maybe it can help you. Maybe we can turn the pain of loss to the elation we feel in the memories of those loved ones. That's kind of the idea is that when you lose a loved one or something like that and you experience this grief, that eventually that process turns into fun and it turns into a happier moment. Because for sure, 100% there is a pain that accompanies a loss of something significant in your life, like a loved one, or maybe even like a pet that you really loved, or sometimes a special item, something that you valued a lot, and or even like a job or a home or something like that. I think when we think of grieving, it comes with like a person or, like I said, like a loss of a loved one, but grieving something significant. There's obviously going to be a pain for it, and there's no other way of processing that pain than to describe it as grieving. It's like kind of like a guilty, confusing feeling. It's this conflicting thing where like it's confusing because you maybe have never experienced it before. And I always say that loss doesn't get easier. Like when you lose people in your life, it doesn't get easier, or lose certain significant things. It doesn't get easier. And it becomes very confusing. I think it's always feels like it's so abrupt, even if beforehand you've kind of taken that acceptance of like it's gonna happen. But also maybe a little bit of a guilty feeling in the way that you could have done something, even though sometimes I mean life is so crazy in the way that it's a force that you're kind of just riding along. You're kind of just riding the wave and until your inevitable end. And I just think it's I don't know. There is a lot of guilt I know that people feel for no reason, even if they didn't. Like a disease takes someone, or you lose a job because it's just a job. The business is closing down itself, and there's some things that are just so out of your hand, but you can't help but to feel guilty about it. That's a tough feeling. Along with I think pain coincides with. It's like pain's an overall umbrella term, and pain coincides with a bunch of different feelings, right? It's that guiltiness, is that confusing. It's the physical hurt, it's the emotional hurt, it's all that kind of correlating together. With grief, the classic, like, everybody talks about like the stages of grief, of the five stages of grieving. You kind of have that first, you have the denial. You don't want to accept the fact of a loss. You don't want to accept the circumstances that are happening, or accept the fact that, you're gonna have to continue on without this thing in your life, or you're gonna have to go through this certain pain. And 100%, that's like the first big hill I think to kind of climb over. It's outright denial. Even if you know it's a fact and you're kind of accepting it in this deep part of your brain, there's that denial that it can't be true, right? And then that anger. I think that's another tough hill in the simple fact of like emotion. Maybe not always anger, but some sort of emotional thing where you're starting that processing. You're starting to get over the denial and the fact has become true. So, you can't help but to feel like with that confusion and that pain starting to set in, it makes everything so tense. And anger might be something you feel. Sadness, like an immense sadness, might be something you feel. Maybe a combination of both, or a whole lack of anything where it's like a total numbness. Emotion's such a fickle thing that you really don't know what's going to happen sometimes. And then there becomes reasoning. That's the third step, is there's a reasoning to think. You start to really understand, like, hopefully start to understand that this is what happened. And, you come to accept the fact that there's a loss that happened, a loss of a loved one, a loss of something significant, and you've gotten past this emotion. And so now you're starting to say, like, well, I couldn't do anything. So, this is what, obviously it happens. Something with their life or something happens, and, with these circumstances, well, of course, this is what's going to happen. A loss is going to happen. Sometimes loss is inevitable in some circumstances, and it's just a matter of time. So, you can do as much thinking beforehand, but when it becomes time to that grieving process, there's that reasoning after that denial and anger. It can be very difficult. And then an inevitable depression. That's like the fourth thing, is there becomes a very big low where there is nothing. You're not mad anymore. You can't even think, It's just you're sitting in that fact of loss. You're sitting in the circumstances that you're all of a sudden in. And that's a deep, deep dark hole. That's where the climb, I think, you know, you've kind of done this whole big uphill, like, battle against all this resisting anger and, all these things in your head that you don't want to like accept. And then you plummet right down tumbling down the hill into this depression. You know what I'm saying? But you kind of realize that eventually, like, the last step of grieving is acceptance. And I don't know what's the perfect way of acceptance. You kind of, it's not like these five stages of grieving are like what you need to go through. It just happens to be what people go through. And it sometimes can be flipped. Like, some people are so angry right at the moment of death, and it's the anger at first, and it's the emotion at first, and then becomes denial, or maybe it's like you immediately kind of understood what was happening, so the reasoning steps in right off the bat. Excuse me. But it's one of those things where that's just the things that people go through. It's not like that's the step for step what you need to do. This is the only way to do it type thing. It's just like that's just what happens sometimes. And this is kind of like the process and what like has been seen. But truly, as there's no timeline for grieving. There's no timeline for emotions. Things come in waves, and you know other factors of your life kind of feed into certain things like that with certain processings of emotion. So there is never a timeline. And I think that it's impossible to avoid grieving. I mean, you can hold off on something and, put up a blinder or whatever to a certain loss in your life, but inevitably there's going to be some sort of process, whether you are, actively conscious of that processing. It's going to happen eventually. It's going to rear its head. And it's almost like you have to be kind of willing to go through the ride because suppressing that grief is just going to prolong that process. It's just going to make it longer, and I think maybe it hurts to maybe have sometimes a predetermined grieving process where you feel like you should get over something quicker, or like right off the bat maybe you don't feel super emotional about something and you think that there's something wrong with you or something like that. And maybe that can put a little bit of blockage on like how you truly should be like processing. Like I said, like pain and grief, it's such an umbrella term, yeah, umbrella term in the sense that it doesn't look the same for everybody, and with no timeline, you don't know how it's going to happen. You think you should cry and be emotional with the loss of something, but you may not be that right off the bat, or you just never truly understand it, or you understand it too quickly, and you're kind of like, confused about that. Like I said, with grieving becomes confusion. That pain is very confusing, so you don't really know. And that's the whole thing is like sometimes things are so long term, and maybe even more so like you could take a long time to grieve, but maybe you think that you've done your grieving process and then all of a sudden something comes back up years later. Like you're able to maybe bounce it off for a little while, or put it to the side for this short period of time until inevitably something happens. It comes back around. That's what happens. Emotions come back around. That's kind of what happens. Everybody has these different emotional responses, so you never really know like what's going to happen and when it's going to come and what's going to come back around or whatever. But I think maybe there are certain ways to help with grieving. Whether it's like you yourself like grieving, or someone that's going through that grieving process, there's possibly some things you could do. You know, I think it's like I think there's a resistance to judging the process, right? I think that's one of the first things. It's like, don't judge that you should be sad, or don't judge that because someone's not acting a certain way or they're overacting or to your whatever view. Don't ever judge that. Like I said, processing grief and that pain is so confusing that it just doesn't look the same for everybody. And those 5 stages of grief aren't necessarily like an outline. They're just what people go through. It's kind of the general feel of people grieving. It's kind of like one of those things where you should void the thoughts of like also with like is someone sad enough, or are you sad enough? Are you reacting with enough like emotion? I remember I forget what the freaking movie's called, but there's a movie with Jake Gyllenhaal where like his wife dies, I think, and throughout the movie he kind of has like this weird grieving process where at first like he doesn't know how to act, and he goes to the funeral and he doesn't know how to like he doesn't feel like he's sad enough or whatever, and like other people around him are very sad for him and tell him how sorry they are for him, but he's like he feels weird that he's not grieving process properly. But then as the movie goes on, he kind of like descends into a little bit of like sanity as in going outright crazy, or insanity by like going outright crazy, but he kind of just like loses it a little bit. He was pieced together, and then all of a sudden that grieving happens. And I think I kind of love that, like in the sense that you don't know when it's going to kick in, and it may not kick in right off the bat. Closure takes time though. And that's the thing you can tell is that sometimes the fact in that of knowing what happened and just really taking that in and accepting it is hard. And closure, even that doesn't maybe even necessarily fix closure. You can accept something as fact, but still maybe feel weird about it, and it still brings up these certain emotions. And I don't even know what closure necessarily means. I wouldn't say that it's a total lack of emotion towards this loss or anything like that. You always want to hold something, maybe. But like you want to be able to validate your feelings in grieving. I think that's an important thing is like no matter if it's, strong, sadness or strong anger, or it's a total numbness, or, people are totally denying it outright. You kind of have to just accept it, whether it's yourself feeling that way or accepting of other people feeling that way. You just got to know that, like I said, it's just, I always say, like, it's such a confusing time that, emotions ride in waves. And so you just don't know how people are going to really respond to that. Pain responses are different amongst everybody, truly. But grievers want compassion. That's like the whole thing. They want people to listen. They want people to maybe even like help them out by asking questions, and sharing memories is a big thing too. I think that's the whole thing is eventually through the grieving process you get to this elation of like these memories of fun that you had in these people's lives, and eventually like you think of them at first and the loss hits and it's sad, but then eventually you think about them later and it's all these great memories that you once remembered, and you remembered how great of a person you are, and that's what you hold on to. So that it's just grievers just want to be felt. They just want that compassion. They want to know that their emotions are okay, are the ones that they're feeling are okay, or the ones that they're are not feeling are okay. I think losing someone or losing something significant is super tough, and I've lost an uncle. I've lost my mom's mom, my grandma on my mom's side, and so it's tough. Like, and I'm young. Like, I felt like I was really young with my uncle. I was like 13 or 12 or whatever, and my grandma was a couple years ago, and I felt like I cried when I went to her funeral or whatever. But like, it's one of those things where maybe I felt like I should have done more or something like that. I should have been there for my family, but everybody just grieves a little differently. That's what you kind of realize. And I wasn't necessarily super close to her. I'm closer to my other grandmother, so I can't even think of. I don't even want to think about that. Jesus Christ. It's like, but it's one of those things where I know that loss will happen, and besides losing people in my life, I have lost like significant things. Like a couple years ago, a storage unit that held a lot of my like childhood stuff and like my little sister's childhood stuff, and like literally most of my dad's belongings burnt down in a fire. And that was a tough time, and that's still something I think about today. And I think about it's hard to, it's like the things I'm trying to remember what were in the storage unit, yada yada yada. Like it's grieving is so different for everybody, and it's a pain that people feel when they lose something significant or someone significant, and there is never a timeline to say that this is how long it should take. And if you're taking too long or you feel like you haven't done it properly, it's all a matter of time before the processing takes place. And you just hope that eventually you just hope that people are heard when they're going through that pain, and that they have this compassion that's showed towards you, whether you're going through it or other people are going through it. And hopefully you can turn that pain into some sort of happiness. Having compassion for others is a human nature thing. It's something that I think we all have a little bit of. There is a lot that we do as people, and there's a lot that we handle in our own lives, and that can feel a little bit unsettling. But that does present an understanding of how others function through, similar experiences. We know there are hardships and more misfortunes that happen in life that could bring upon sadness or anger or any sort of intense emotion or something like that. A depression for the way things are going in our lives. Having sympathy for others is understanding in some way others' emotions and feelings in other circumstances. There are many small adjustments each person has to do to cope, but collectively there is a unfortunate that we all kind of go through in our lives through different circumstances. When showing sympathy to others, we will share those feelings and try to relate to them through our experiences and emotions. There are some people who are more sympathetic than others, and it's important to have sympathetic people for sure. Your sympathy isn't warranted necessarily, though. But as a human, there should be a certain compassion and understanding that you have towards others' hardships. It's hard to say something that, what sympathy definitely is, like definitively is. It's kind of one of those things where it's feeling emotional when other people are emotional. It's kind of this state of understanding that someone goes through these hardships and you're willing to step in to help them with those hardships. It's different than empathy in the sense that empathy is like understanding. You may not be immediately stepping into someone to try to relieve their emotions, or like you're not crying someone's tears, but you're understanding and you can relate to them. There's a bit of that in sympathy, but sympathy is more of that, it's kind of like it's like a shared emotion. It's like you see someone sad, so it immediately makes you sad. You see someone angry, it immediately makes you angry. Feeling for, sympathy is just that feeling compassionate for other people's misfortunes, understanding hardships that people encounter as you encounter your own hardships. And it's a certain reaction you have to people's emotions with emotion itself. You're feeling alongside another's feelings. That's really what sympathy is. It's literally feeling what someone else is feeling as intensely as they are. And I think like one of them things is I think we know that we're going to go through hardships and we have these certain emotions in our lives, and even if we don't want people to know about them or we want people to come in and help us, we just hope that at least there's a level of compassion and understanding. And you don't have to be that person either. I wouldn't say that you want to be sympathetic, but you don't have to always be a sympathetic person. It's sometimes hard to when you're dealing with your own emotions and you got your own things going on. It's hard to cry the tears of other people and feel bad for other people, but compassion nonetheless is important. Because with sympathy you're sharing feelings, like we all share similar experiences. It just kind of looks different by different upbringings and different walks of life. So it just looks different in smaller steps and smaller increments, but on in a bigger picture it looks different, but everybody has shared feelings. And that's the whole thing with sympathy is you're sharing your feelings and you're sharing a similar emotion with that person. It's kind of one of those things where you're just trying to like, you know, show them that you understand. A lot of people when they want that sympathy, whether it's like, they're consciously wanting it or they're consciously asking for it, you just want to be seen when you're going through something emotional. Like I said, you don't have to have people, crying your tears or whatever, but it's one of those things where you just want people to see you and like not like pay attention to you, but like see that you are going through something and that you might need a little help or you just might need to be left alone. Sorry, a little stuttering. Sorry. But it's important to understand others. I think as like a general thing, as a walks of life, it's you don't have to go around always wondering what other people are doing and whether it's different than your life. But just as maybe you got some problems going on, you got certain hardships, and you can't always work through things. That should leave you with an understanding that there are others that do the same, that go through similar things, and it's important to understand, shared misfortunes and shared struggles. It helps you make you feel a little human, and maybe understand that like because you've gone through something and someone else is going through the same thing. Of course, they wouldn't understand it, right? Like I said, everyone has plights and problems. Everybody has things they're going through, and I mean, nobody is really perfect in handling circumstances. Maybe in some circumstances, maybe there's some people who can manage things a little bit better and they can work through their emotions a little bit better than others, and but I think sometimes it'll be inevitable that they'll come across something that they weren't ready for. It becomes a little confusing, and so emotions go unregulated in a way, or you start to process that in that certain way. I think it's one of those things when people are like when you find more sympathetic people, when there's a more because not everybody has the same level of sympathy, but when someone is considered a sympathetic person, they have this like inclination to help others. It's one of those things where it's like they feel sad, like you said, they feel sad for someone, or they feel angry for someone, and so they immediately want to try to step in. They feel this inclination that they have the emotion too, and they feel just as you feel, so they need to take that step in. And I don't doubt that it does help sometimes, having sympathetic people, more inclined sympathetic people can help. It can feel good sometimes to have someone that is really going through it with you, and it's unfortunate, crying the tears with you, and they get angry at what you're getting angry at. It can really feel good and cathartic in some ways. I don't think maybe sympathy helps in the long run of processing necessarily. Like I said, it's an emotion, with emotion. It's reacting to someone's feelings with feelings. And like I said, it helps you be seen, it helps you be heard, but it's not going to process everything properly. It's just not going to do everything. There's a thing that like humans are altruistic, right? That we're other oriented, we're connected to others in some way in certain experiences, even when we don't look alike and we didn't live in the same places, we didn't grow up in the same places. There's this idea with like sympathy and particularly people who are more sympathetic than others, that there's an altruisticness, and I believe that a little bit. I do believe in a certain like similarity amongst others. Even when you're born in different places, there's a certain level of emotion that we all can feel at any moment, and there's a certain level of sympathy I think we need to have at times, right? It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, and it's kind of a weird thing that there are always going to be different reactions to different circumstances, and I think it's one of them things where like you might be able to handle certain emotions in this one thing, but then all of a sudden you lose it in this other thing, and maybe because you believe that you can handle everything and all of a sudden you lose it, then you kind of don't think you deserve sympathy or something like that, where you're kind of like, don't feel sorry for me. It's something I struggle with where like I perceive that I need, like I have a certain capability or something like that, or I perceive that I don't need to feel so emotional, but I can't help it. And so then I kind of get like, I kind of think that like, why am I getting so emotional? I don't need to be emotional. It doesn't make sense. Why I've never, it wasn't this way before, or it's not like this way, with this other thing. Da 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 da. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a weird thing with like maybe there is a certain deservingness of sympathy, right? People are vulnerable. That's the whole thing is like when you're going through emotions and when you're as a sympathetic person, you're showing a certain vulnerability, 100%. And people have a certain deservingness when it comes to like having sympathy. Like we need to be seen and we need to know that our emotions are okay even when we doubt our own emotions. So having that objectiveness of sympathy where it's another person showing you that or other places that are kind of, you know, comforting those emotions and stuff like that, that can help us 100%, you know what I'm saying? It's there's different ways I think in portraying sympathy too. It's hard to say just like, what does it mean to have emotions with other people's emotions, feelings with other people's feelings? What does sympathy even look like? I think with anything, with just like comforting someone in general, whether it's sympathy or empathy, verbal communication, literally like a certain like verbal acknowledgement of the situation and like, a certain like acknowledgement of the reason for emotions. People like to be, like I said, when they're going through emotions, even if you have a doubt that you're like, you shouldn't be feeling that, you want to be heard and you want to be seen. And when other people see you and they let you know that you've been like seen and they kind of say, hey, it's okay to go through these things. And hey, it's okay to be like, it's okay to be emotional. We understand. Like that helps. And that can be very comforting. And it may not help in the long run, but in that peak of emotion, it really can be beneficial 100%. But I think sometimes it's hard for people to like talk about that thing. You got to be vulnerable when you're having emotions, and when you're giving sympathy, you're a vulnerable person too. So maybe it's kind of hard to just outright communicate. There's different levels of that kind of thing, and so it's kind of hard to maybe just like, people don't want to hear that reasoning too sometimes. So it's kind of hard in that way. So there's a lot of nonverbal ways. There's a lot of nonverbal communicative ways. I think with things like, body language and body and orientation, like if you come in and someone's sad and you come in with like a high energy type thing and like a happiness, it may maybe make them feel like they're not, not being seen, right? It makes them feel like their sadness is maybe even unwarranted. But if you come in with a similar like somberness, right? You got a kind of a somberness to your body, you sit down softly and you're doing things like lightly, that can help someone know that like, okay, we're still in this mode and you understand what I'm going through by your presence. Facial expressions kind of go along with that where like you're kind of actively listening and you're showing someone if someone's telling you something about something that makes them sad or makes them angry or something like that and you got a big old smile on your face, it can feel off-putting for that person. And so, like I said, so like when you're a sympathetic person, you usually feel with emotion. So you're kind of reading their face with your face. You're kind of showing that similar emotion, that shared emotion. And not everybody's into it, but like physical contact is a big thing. Like, hugging someone or, just patting them on the back, holding their hand at a time of need, things like that, or just physically taking them away from a certain spot that they're making them emotional in that moment. I think those are more so those easier signs to do. I think it's like harder to control the nonverbal communications. I think at times, like when you're a particularly sympathetic person, like I said, you just kind of feel with the feeling. So, your face kind of tells a different story, right? Or it tells the story of like how you're reacting and your body kind of like it's an unconscious thing. You're immediately trying to comfort someone and you're trying to let them know, you know what I'm saying? And but it's not a bad thing. I think it's like a very good way to comfort someone. And some people just don't want to talk about it. So when it comes to that verbal way of kind of like portraying your sympathy when you're asking people about it or you're sharing emotions, it can be hard. It really can be. And it's imperfect in regulations of emotions, right? It's like not everybody's the same. And so that nonverbal expression may be the quickest way to express that sympathy, that hug, pat on the back, showing on your face that you're, sad, the somberness, the ease that you approach someone with. That can be really helping and really calming for someone. Excuse me, Jesus. But sympathy, like I said, sympathy is helpful. It's helpful in allowing others to be seen and heard. But I will say that it's not helpful in the whole idea of processing. It's kind of perpetuating the emotion when you're going through the same emotion. When you're crying with someone's tears and you're getting mad with someone's anger, it's only perpetuating that emotion. And when someone's not necessarily processing it correctly and they're not processing their emotion and regulating it, properly, however that is, because like I said, emotional regulation is imperfect for everybody. Not everybody's the same with that kind of stuff. So people will struggle with certain processing of emotions, and it's not going to help when you're like sitting there being emotional with them. But compassion nonetheless, right? You can't relieve others through your own emotional response. It's just not going to happen. Like you crying them, their tears isn't going to help them stop crying, right? So eventually you're going to have to kind of objectively stand back and understand what leads to emotions or feelings. And that's when kind of the empathy kind of plays in with compassion. It's, those two sides. It's sympathy is the feeling of feeling, and, empathy is more of the understanding of that feeling. And that's the way of processing. And it could be, empathy can be hurtful in the short run. I'll talk about it in a future episode. I know I will. But empathy can be hurtful in the short run in the sense that, like, people don't want to be like kind of like, told what's going on, or like, people don't want the shared experiences necessarily from an objective side. And, when you're an empathetic person, you're really just trying to tell people like, an opinion based off of what you've gone through. And not everybody wants to hear that right off the bat. So, but whatever, like nonetheless, it's important to have a little bit of compassion for other people's nature. Other people are going through hardships just as you're going through, and you don't always have to sit there and think like, oh, people are struggling worse than I am, and like the belittling your own hardships and misfortunes isn't going to help anything. So you know that there is a shared struggle, and it's good to have a little compassion. And when you're going through some struggle, there is a need for sympathy. And you don't have to be particularly more sympathetic than other people because, as we've seen in society, there are some pretty extremely sympathetic people. And sympathy can really help letting know that people are seen in their emotions and that what people are going through is okay. I try to do my best with staying connected with world news. I think it can be kind of, intimidating to kind of look around and see different articles about different countries. And there are good news, but there's a lot of bad news as well. But I think it's important to kind of stay connected and kind of see what's going around in the world. And I'm trying to do my best to try to throw in maybe more, real world events into my podcast. And I might start trying to do that, like, every podcast, trying to talk about some things that are going on in the world that kind of, you know, correlate to certain, events and certain people and certain groups of people in certain countries or whatever. I think that just, it's something that like I said, I'm interested in and something I'm always trying to ingest in and stuff like that. But not too long ago, it was about maybe like a couple weeks ago or something like that, maybe 3 weeks ago or something. I came across an article that was by Business Insider, and I don't know if Business Insider is like the most credible source, but nonetheless, I was starting to do a little bit of research beyond the article itself, and the article itself was I forget what the whole name was, but it was talking about China's increase in this incentive to have children, and I was kind of interested in that. I've always thought of China in this way of like I've always heard there's this overpopulation problem or whatever, and that there's too many people or whatever. Now that's a very American stance, and like I said, like I only know what's going on really in America, and I try to do my best around the world and stuff like that. But that's what I've always been told. And for so long, also what I've known about China is that they had that one child policy. That was a really big thing, is that because of an overpopulation problem or whatever. But I was just reading the article and I thought it was kind of interesting, and I thought I would share some of my thoughts on like, I'll read the article, share some of the details, and then maybe some of my thoughts on like not only having children but like government intervention and that kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? trying to do my best here, so just stick with me. But China's communist government, they have a communist government. They are recently, maybe the last few years, are heavily incentivizing women to have more children. They've launched like a bunch of campaigns of kind of trying to promote a birth-friendly culture. And the president of China, Xi Jinping, I think is his name. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. He wants to cultivate a new culture of marriage and childbearing. And like I said, for all what I've known is that for a long time, I don't think the marriage problem has necessarily been like a thing, but I don't know. But the childbearing thing, the children thing, but that was forced through government intervention. That for a long time they were forcing families and women specifically to have one kid, and that if they had another one, then it's too much. And I think there were certain like special grants or special permission to get for others to have more kids. I don't know how you decide that. And I think it was a way of trying to control like a rise in poverty. Like they don't want the lower class, whatever type thing, you know? They don't want the lower classes to have too many kids and like taking up resources, which is just shit. You know, it's like a weird thing to think. Excuse my language. But very much so in the article I was reading, it was talking about how Chinese women are resisting to this thing. I mean, not necessarily in the way of like they don't want kids, but they're kind of defying this mounting pressure, especially like coming from a culture where it was forced to have one child, and now they're pushing you to like trying to, you know, incentivize having multiple children. And inevitably, undoubtedly, they're put off by that kind of harassment. And I think that's a thing that's shared around the world, is that government intervention in that way. Like maybe it's needed in some things, but when it comes to something very personable, you know, personal and personable about someone, and it's their body, and they, you know, it's financially that you have to like commit to a kid. It's hard, and they're put off by the harassment and the burdens in general of children. And I think it's one of those things where in China you always hear about like women are often mistreated by the government, and however you feel around the world about like where you live. It could be, you know, similar. But it's one of those things where like I know in my sense, like I would be very put off if the government was like, you know, limiting something from the past, like for so long my life, or you know how I grew up or whatever, like it was this way, and then all of a sudden they're trying to incentivize something that they shamed you for. You know what I'm saying? That'd be kind of weird. It would make you feel like you wouldn't want to be participating in any of that kind of thing. You just want to like block it off as much as possible. But also, it's a very real thing that around the world, I think, and especially I guess in China, is that some people can't afford to take care of anything besides work in themselves. You know, they just work and they can barely take care of themselves. And also in China, there's a very big thing with taking care of like your parents and taking care of like the elderly and things like that. And so it's a lot of people, a lot of like couples or, you know, women or, you know, men who are in that age group of having kids or whatever that age group is, their money is spent otherwise. And it feels like work culture is very like relentless in China, and the payoff isn't always, you know, happily, you know, it isn't always work, you know, isn't always like helping anything. It's a very, like I said, very heavy work culture, very heavy elder care culture, which is good. It's not a bad thing to have a good work culture and to take care of your elders at all. It's a good thing. But it's one of those things where like when they're not getting a lot of money for the work, and it takes a lot of money to take care of yourself you know, at the end of the day, then you got to take care of other people, and that just puts a lot of burden on people. And it just feels like one of those things where in this kind of modern day culture in China, a lot of people believe there's an impracticality in marriage and children, that there's a lot of like economic concerns. And I don't necessarily agree with like I mean, there is, you could say there are limited personal freedoms 100%, but at the end of the day, you know, your personal freedoms are a privilege and they're not a right. I mean, and that's a I'm sorry to say that. I mean, we should have a right to feel good in our lives, and we should have the right to be able to access things, but you got to realize like, you know, being able to buy, fast food or like go and like watch a movie, that's a privilege, you know. Like, yeah, that's a privilege, and that's an unfortunate reality. But I do understand the limited personal freedoms, but I think like, you know, freedoms become different when you have kids. You just have different advantages and you do different things. Life changes and you got to take on those hardships, unfortunately. But it's one of those things where I always thought that China was overpopulated. That's what you've always heard, and maybe that's always something that China themselves have always kind of portrayed is that they have this overpopulation problem. But apparently, in the last like few years, I guess they've had kind of a, or like however many years, they've had a demographic collapse, or they're facing one. That there was a 10 million babies born in 2022 compared to 16 million in 2020 or 2012, sorry. And they believe that by the year 2040, there will be 400 million people above the age of 60, which is 400 million is higher than the US population total. So they're going to have 400 million people just living over the age of 60. And I know plenty of people who are over 60 that are beyond capable. My own father, my grandparents, like I know plenty of people who are in their 60s that are beyond capable of doing things in their life. You know what I'm saying? But that does kind of tell of a declining birth rate. And that kind of like has highlighted an urgency amongst Chinese government and Chinese officials that kind of highlights an urgency to prevent that collapse. And also, marriage rates have fallen from 13 million in 2013 to 6.8 million in 2022. And you don't need to be married to have kids. I mean, I think it's important to have kind of that family put together, but you know, it almost kind of feels forced at nowadays with like how hard it is to live by yourself. So it feels like you're kind of forcing yourself to get into relationships, and it's not as like it's I don't know. That's kind of a big question, and like it's hard to take care of yourself nowadays around the world. It feels like there are some places maybe doing better than others. And I live in America where a place that like I can easily change my fortunes. I can easily be doing good tomorrow. It's just sometimes that, I don't know where to look necessarily. But that's a lot of things. I think a lot of people when they feel like they're drowning in their own selves, then they don't want to bring in another person to be in a relationship with. And even if that helps economically, it may not help with your easing of your emotions and how you feel. And like, it's just one of them things where, like I said, you don't have to get married to have babies, but babies are the rate of babies are also falling as well. And like I said, I always heard that China was, this like overpopulated place. But from 2000 from 1979 to 2015, China enforced that one child policy. They enforced it after the population increased from 540 million in 1949 to 969 million in 1980, which is kind of a lot in the span of 31 years. That's 400 more, 429 more. That's insane. That's more than the US. That's insane. I actually never thought about like how small the population of the US is compared to like I mean like, comparatively to most countries we're bigger than most countries, but then you think about like India or China or something like or Russia or something like that. It's crazy. But they became this fear of overpopulation. There was this fear of not being able to provide or control people too, which like in a communist government, that's the whole idea is that you're controlling people. But apparently it was really heavy in like urban areas, which kind of more dense, condensed group of people. That makes sense. More people, more babies, da 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 type thing, right? That makes sense. But there were some cases where they allowed like second childs and like especially if the first one was like a woman, like you had a girl right off the bat, they give you that permission to have a second child. It's such a weird, I'm very blessed to be in America, very blessed to grow up American. I just don't get that. I literally don't get it, and I can understand a fear of overpopulation if you don't have the resources, and but it's kind of a fault of China's own government and how they, you burn enough bridges with people and you kind of act a certain way and you treat your people a certain way and they're not going to want to like listen to you and people are not going to want to help you out. And apparently there were some pretty heavy consequences. As there were some things that were little as like heavy fines, or things as serious as enforced sterilization, freaking chemically castrating women and cutting dudes balls off. You know what I'm saying? Freaking a, and having children taken away, and that's a sad thing. That's why like if you are American, like in America, like I noticed that there's a lot of like kids, like who are Asian people who were raised in America but born in China, who were raised or adopted and raised by white people who around like the age of 40ish, like or 30 or something like that. You start to realize that like it's probably because of that. It's probably because of that. in their 40s and 50s, and you kind of wonder, you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely the reason they're over here. That's a sad thing, and it's 100%. You're seeing a big pushback from Chinese women, very much so. And why wouldn't they? I mean, like, nobody wants to be forced, and nobody should have, besides yourself, should have a say in what you should do with your bodies and how you should live your life. And I understand a certain like economic concern, and I 100% understand like the being thrown off by that kind of harassment and kind of the over encumbrance of being this pushing of having more kids by the government or any sort of intervention by the government. But I don't agree necessarily with the limited personal freedoms. At the end of the day, kids, you're gonna have to change your life up, and personal freedoms. I mean, they're going to change as well. So at the end of the day, why not change it with a kid if you can? Also, and that's a big key word is if you can. But generally my thoughts. I'll give a little summary of my thoughts, I guess. It's so hard to necessarily throw myself into the mind of the Chinese people, not because I don't choose to understand how they live, but I'm an American, and my government is way different than what they are, and my views of things are way different than what their views are, and there's different economic circumstances, and there's a different type of work culture and different personal freedoms, I think, in like our world than there is in China. So it's hard to sit there and say like I can understand what they're going through, right? But I also can say that in the acceptance of like humans, I don't think humans want to be forced to told what to do. Generally, I think humans may need a little guidance, but they don't want to be told what to do. People don't want to sit there and have like their governments and authority rule everything they do. That's just not how we want to live. And I think 100% when you don't feel forced in life, everything feels more freeing. When you don't feel like you're forced to have to work extra hours at a job just to make a minimum paycheck, I think then people want to work a little harder. Some people, not everybody, but some. When it feels like that you can afford a kid, even at a minimal wage, like you can still afford a kid with comfort, I think people would be having kids. If marriage was promoted in a certain way or it was, just it felt like more freeing. Like I said, if it felt more freeing for everybody, then 100% that like people would be more willing to do things. And I have maybe a certain kind of view when it comes to like the number of people. I know a lot of people share that kind of like um I know that people share the kind of sentiment of an overpopulation type thing where there's too many people and there's not enough people maybe doing things or with how many different experiences and cultures that it feels a little weird when there's so much difference in people, but that makes things beautiful. And how I look at things with you know, an argument that I always hear is that, there's so many bad things that are going down, especially just with Americans maybe, but there's so many bad things going along in America, maybe the world at whole, that it's like you don't want to put their kids into that place. And it's like, in my mind, if there are more problems that are going to be arising, and let's just say that, let's just look at it that way. Let's say there are more issues that are going to be coming up, and, what's the only way to deal with issues and problems is to solve them. If you let them sit there and build and think that you can't do anything about it, it's going to build up and eventually will become a bigger problem than it was. And sometimes, right now you kind of look at certain things, you wonder why, there's not more done about it or whatever. And there's why there's like not enough like, energy put into something. I think in some ways there maybe is not enough people doing those types of things. I don't think there's enough people that maybe care about certain problems that you kind of freak out and you might get a little existential or nihilistic on certain things. But I really believe that some people don't really want to deal with that stuff and handle that stuff. And if they were given the opportunity to, up in front, first person deal with things, they wouldn't. So in my mind, you need more capable people. And however you view younger generations, whatever you view younger generations, they learn from us as we learn from older people. Like, I'm a millennial, I'm right there in the millennial Gen Z. I look at Gen X and I look at like baby boomers and I see what they did and I learn from that. And so younger generations are going to learn from us. And one thing we should be teaching is that, yeah, there's going to be these problems in the world, but we need people to solve them. In that, you're not becoming famous isn't, being a TikTok celebrity and, notoriety isn't important anymore. What's important is that you're single-handedly or you're along with other people joining arm in arm and figuring out what we need to do in the world. I think that's one of the biggest arguments I hear is that the world's going to shit, so why have kids? Well, If things are going to shit and there's more problems going on, excuse my language, I think you need more hands to deal with it. You need more people that are capable, and you need to teach those more people how to be capable. It's just one of those things when people already have that devastated mindset, that existential mindset, they don't have any motivations to change anything. So why don't we teach the future generation to do things? It's a real world thing to be concerned with economics and devastating events and war and death and people really freak themselves out with that stuff. And I'm raising my hand, me too. But I know that the world's going to continue. I'm going to die one day and it's going to continue. And I can't fathom the thought of my great, great, great grandchildren living in a piece of shit world that was once so good. You know what I'm saying? So, what I'm going to do is I'm always going to teach my kids, and they're going to teach their kids, and they're going to teach their kids that we can do something about it. That, even if I struggle with that in my own sentiment, like, I don't believe I'm meant for anything, I don't believe I'm meant for any good, but I know I can do it. I have an optimistic view of how we can live this world. Materialistic things are going to die, right? Things are just going to end, right? Things are going to go away, but life will not. We can continue life. We can still make things great if we keep pushing. And like I said, I think having more kids isn't a bad thing, and I believe that we're at a point in history where we have an underpopulation in the in the wrong ways. We're underpopulated in the meaningful people and the people that have a drive to do things for this country, and we're overpopulated with the people that don't believe anything good's happening. Wow, that's my take. Like I said, I'm trying my best to read into some real world scenarios and give my thoughts in that way because I can't sit here and not say that and not play that I'm not an opinionated person. And I think I sometimes struggle with like wanting to share my feelings. I do, as a lot of people do. And I don't want to be in, I just worry that people are going to take certain things out of context too. And that's always a big thing. But I got to stop being so scared and just talk about things. And this was a good article because it just like it really feeds into that whole like nobody likes in government intervention when it's forced like that, and especially when it comes from such a negative time where government was forcing you so heavily in some way, then just trying to act like, oh no, we're incentivizing you now. That's a weird thing. And this idea of like future struggles only increasing is very real to a lot of people nonetheless. But I think it's important to have kids, and I think even with like relationships and marriage, I think that's important too, and that's important for raising kids. And if we could just have a bunch of kids and teach them right, and if people can kind of get over that doomed existential nihilistic kind of view, then I think the world can continue to be a good place. Alrighty, friends, that's really all I have to say about that. Episode 47 done. Thank y'all for listening as always. If you want to listen to this episode or any of my future episodes or any past episodes, I always make sure to upload them on YouTube and Spotify under the Odd Thoughts podcast. If you find anything I say relatable or enjoyable or anything in any way, I always appreciate a little support. You could subscribe to my podcast on YouTube or Spotify. You could also follow me on a few different social medias. I have an Instagram. I also have Facebook, and then I also am on Twitter. I'll make sure to link those all in a video description below, as well as any like channel description, bio, just all that good stuff. But I always appreciate the chance to get on the microphone and talk to y'all. I didn't record one earlier this week. I'm sorry about that. Like I said, I was going through some things, and I just don't feel very confident sometimes. Like when I'm down on myself, I don't feel confident enough to get on the microphone. But I do know that getting on the microphone helps me. And when I get a chance to talk to you guys and, share things about my life and just talk about topics that maybe do relate to me, it always helps. But yeah, I love y'all. Don't forget to tell someone else you love them as well. Make sure to show up for yourselves every single day and be excellent to each other.